This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Alara Sage for the first time. And thank you for being on the show. And
Hi. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
so it's always great to talk to new people. We're very happy to have different people on the show from time to time. But we are on a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. Within an hour, we'll be on that platform. So use coupon code GHOST to get 1 month free premium subscription. You can stop scrolling and start listening to your favorite podcast or news article read to you in the natural human voice. So thank you for being on the show tonight. You are a person who's been pushing the power of women to reignite themselves and rethinking and refining what it means to be a woman. Maybe you'd like to talk about how into that. When did you decide that was something that you wanted to bring to the world?
Yeah. So, I had a spiritual awakening in 2015. Um, and something happened to me that's called Kundalini awakening. And I didn't know what it was at the time. It's a funny story, actually, where at the time, I was working on horses. I did physical therapy to horses. And I had just started my spiritual journey. I was meditating. But on that day, I was driving to work. I was driving to go visit the horses. And I have intuition. And my intuition said to me, say Om 3 times, which wasn't even something I did. I wasn't like an omer or anything. But I said, okay. And so I did 3 really big, solid Oms all the way, full breath. And on the third Om, there was a ball of energy that shot through my body and out my crown. And I went into a full body orgasm. And I had no idea what was happening to me. I had to pull the car over to the side of the road because it was so intense. And then afterwards, I was in this really massive ecstatic state of just like, wow, I feel incredible. And I had no idea what had happened to me. I didn't know what Kundalini Shakti was at the time. And so it actually started me on this journey of really connecting to that energy, which is, when you see the doctor symbols, the 2 snakes that go intertwining of the cross, that's the Kundalini. That's the Kundalini Shakti symbol. The Kundalini Shakti is our own inner healing energy that's been known on this planet for a very, very long time. And so that's where I was really first introduced to my own feminine power, even though I didn't even know what it was. And really, it transformed my life from before, where I was really living in a state of, you know, everything appeared fine in my life. I had a husband, I had kids, I had a nice house, everything from the outside appeared perfect. But I was really unfulfilled and really like not really understanding pleasure or enjoyment. I didn't really have any of those things in my life. And so after the Kundalini awakening, I started to really experience pleasure for the first time in my life, both orgasmically, sexually, and non sexually. And so it was a really massive transition in my life because before I had actually been non orgasmic along portion of my life. So it was very dear to me to go on this process of helping other women achieve the same thing.
And like my perspective, like is that a lot of women have been not really taught what you're talking about. They've nobody really has that kind of conversation, when you're growing up or maturing. I don't think people focus on it. I think people focus on other things, and it's like you have to go kind of search for it, and you found it because it happened to you. But like did you find that like no one had ever really discussed that with you, or did you even talk about it before that happened? or think
Yeah,
about it?
no, I mean, definitely, I was a very I've always been a very sexual person, but like I said, I was really non-orgasmic. I just thought something was wrong with me, because I had a lot of
Mm,
friends who obviously were orgasmic, and I just thought, I guess something just doesn't work with me because I don't
mhm.
experience what I would think I should experience. And yeah, definitely not a conversation that I feel like happens for women or men. Our society is not an open conversation for adolescents when we're growing up about what is the experience and how to engage with ourselves in that manner, in an empowering and healing way. We just kind of like leave it up to pornography, in all honesty, which is not a
Yeah.
good
It doesn't, yeah, it
representation.
doesn't. I think people just talk about like marriage or they talk about relationships, but they don't get into like sexual freedom. Except maybe in the 60s when you had the free
Mm,
love and the hippie movement, but I don't even know then if women were really focused on like orgasms, if it was just
right.
like sexuality, but were they actually being satisfied? Maybe they weren't. I don't know because I didn't go read a lot of documentaries about that specific concept, but
Mhm.
it seems like people have like tried to run away from that kind of freedom that you had in the hippie movement, which was more like seeking knowledge and seeking different spiritual concepts, and people were trying to find themselves. But it seems people just got into like finding a career, finding a mate, finding
Mm.
something, but not really being happy. People think they're
Mm.
happy because they have these goals, but they're not really satisfying their inner child. As a musician,
Yes.
we tend to try to satisfy our artistic goals. Like, as a musician, I try to reach into like the carnal part of me or the other side of me, try to go dive deep. I think anybody who's creative will think about those things. But I think if you're not in that kind of space, you maybe don't even give yourself time to do that.
Yeah, and that's one of the reason I wanted to be on this podcast with you, is because I feel like musicians and artists, have a little bit more connection to their creative nature. But there's always more, that we always have the capacity to even connect more into our creative ability, which, our sexual energy and our creative ability go hand in hand. And so I agree with you that people who are, I personally think everybody is creative. Just a lot of people haven't recognized what their version
Yeah,
of
everybody
creativity
can be taught.
is. Yeah. And so definitely people who have kind of connected to that definitely have a more intimate relationship with that. Yes.
Well, I think singer songwriters or producers, like I try to bring a performance out of another artist. I try to get them
Mm.
to reach into who they are. I'm trying to get them to be
Mm.
their authentic self. Right. So a
Right.
lot of what I do is I don't want them to turn them into me. I want them to tap into who they are and actually give me like the best uh like version of yourself or what you're not really showing the world. I want you to dive deep. And that's why I think of producers, or we're like teachers or we're time mentors, we're trying to pull that performance out of another artist. We're trying to
Mm.
get them to reach into what we think they can do. We know they can do more than maybe they even think they can do. And that's part of being an artist. I try to reach that because like in my own work, part of what I do is I found my female voice. I created a character called Josephine Electric that
Mm.
actually is the female. Like I use like different types of tools, but I can actually do my voice in a female version of myself. That I kind of tapped into when I created Female Electric Ghost. The idea that I could touch, reach the female part of myself, and I be a phantom, and I could switch dynamically from male
Mm.
to female characters within my music. They're all kind of based on my own perspectives. And people were like, "Well, what? That's really weird." And I'm like, "But it was like that's what I wanted to do as an artist. That's where my head was at." And it is sensual. It's poetic. I dive into like romantic poetry and all kinds of things. But it really, I try to like boundaries. The idea of what we do is expansive. Expansive sound is my mantra, and I brought it into podcasting. Don't be, you know, have a glass ceiling on your capabilities.
Mhm.
Like try to go as far as you can.
Wow, I really love that. I didn't know that about you. And that's so beautiful because, what I do is I help women to connect to their to their woman, to their feminine, because, a lot of women in our society are really in their masculine energy, right? Especially women who are leaders, women who are in corporate, women who are
Executives.
successful. They've learned to be masculine to be successful, and they've really disconnected themselves from their very, intuitive, creative, feminine power. And it's such a beautiful thing, as you were saying, that you do with people. That's literally what I do with women, because when they reconnect, the beauty about a woman who's been in her masculine energy is that when she reconnects to her feminine, she now has balance and harmony within
Oh yeah,
herself.
because
And
everybody.
now, exactly, it comes through so extraordinary and so beautiful. It's like it's the woman, the woman who's really here to make a difference in the world. So I just adore that about you. That's such a beautiful, beautiful, like, facet of creativity that you've been exploring that absolutely mirrors what I do. So how interesting.
But what I found is like, in order to be, not to try to be, well, just to kind of satisfy what my head is into. Like I was into a lot of poetry. I was at like William Blake and Tennyson and Thoreau, and I was reading all these poets, and they would kind of mask their sexuality, talk about little death. Well, little death is a way of saying an orgasm. But in 19th
Mm,
century, that was like the concept with the poets. They would say a little death is actually Lord Byron and a bunch of other poets. They would
mm,
insert it into their poetry without being direct, so they could get into explicit sexuality within their poetry without being
mm,
direct in that age, and actually talk about things where they could get into a lot of like sexual concepts that are in these poems, but they're masked on levels. And I always say, well, what if I get a little bit more, unmask it? What if I actually start using my female voice, and actually create it? And I use synthesizers. I'm a synthesizer guy, so I figured like, how can I do that? And I found a way to do it in real time, and it was very interesting because I decided to use a phantom, which I use a Phantom of the Opera LED mask when I perform, and I can go switch between these male and female voices without having to wear male or female clothes. I had to say, well, Ghost could be male or female, so I can go either way. In terms of the music, I can go from one character to the next and not have to, change my outfit. But it's in my head. It's like the idea of it, and it's like you tap into it. And I find a lot of musicians will tap into their feminine side or their male
mhm,
side, and it's part of what they do. Female musicians will tap into like try to channel a Mick Jagger, right? And then Mick Jagger was actually trying to channel like female singers with like falsettos, and you see a lot of male voices will channel that falsetto voice from Axl Rose to all these other people. Why? It kind of cuts into this kind of thing where you're androgyny. In new wave movement, you
mhm.
saw it a lot, but it's always been there in music. There's like a level of androgyny and a lot of work going to different, but
Hmm. Wow, that's really beautiful. And with that in mind, I really look forward to how our society moves ahead and expands when we're all using, a more harmonious, not exact balance, because I don't believe it's a balance in that exactness, but more harmonious combination of our inner masculine and inner feminine voices. And because we've been so masculine for so long, and that's everything. I always feel like it has a purpose and serves, and so that's been really wonderful for humanity. But we're ready to now embody more of the feminine energies. And yeah, so when I work with these women, one of the most beautiful things that happens to them is that they really tap into their creative nature. And so, like, several of them have like written books, and they were not authors, they had never thought about being an author, but as soon as they really start to tap into their feminine creativity and their intuition, it's like they can't stop. A book just starts pouring out of their mouth. And it's just a really delightful transformation to see them go from, kind of a serious masculine leadership energy into this very creative and much more spontaneous version of themselves. But it's this beautiful combination of both, which I think is really the genius, is the brilliance within each of us.
it's kind of like the vagina monologues where you kind of tap into your femininity and be able to express it in creative ways, like become an author
Mm-hmm.
to be an actress, maybe you start doing plays or you start painting and you start finding your voice. You know, because I deal with a
Yes.
lot of different types of artists within music. We deal with, visual artists, graphic artists, all, actors, dancers, and it's all art. But everybody kind of taps into different phases, and I've seen them tap into their femininity as dancers and
Mm-hmm.
poets, and it's kind of back and forth. I've seen back and forth, and I've worked with a female artist that actually would shift her voice to male and then go back to
Mm-hmm.
female and kind of do the same kind of thing I was
Mm-hmm.
doing. And we actually worked on a record together because we had the same kind of idea. She liked playing with gender and playing with her own internal vision. That like she had this male side of herself and she had the female side of herself, and she could do both. And we worked
Right.
on a project together. We had the same kind of mindset. But yeah, it just seems like when you can tap into your creative self and you realize that it could be male and female or it's combinations of the both
Mm-hmm.
at different points in time, I think you just become more open and you don't have that glass ceiling on your soul.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. And that's a lot of like what, the Shakti that I was referring to earlier that shot through my body. That's the primordial fem. It's called creative life force energy, just pure creative energy. And so although it's fem power, we all have it within ourselves. And so, to really activate that in ourselves is to really unleash this kind of what you said, this unlimited, bottomless ceiling. I always say bottomless, sideless, and ceilingless version of ourselves. So we can just continue to expand out. That means, that we can experience deeper levels of our own personal genius, the way in which that creative life force energy comes through uniquely through our persona. We can, deepen into more pleasure and more orgasm because there's no ceiling, sides, or bottom on that. We can experience more joy, more abundance. There's no limit to our abilities to expand as humans, which I find extremely delightful because I love expansion and I love really helping people to continue to grow and experience deeper levels of themselves.
So, I mean, does a pleasure mindset take away from a performance mindset, or does it just enhance it when
Yeah,
then you
I
actually end up
love that.
performing better?
Yeah, I love that question because I've had several people ask me that, like meaning like we wouldn't perform, we would only, but no, it actually just enhances it, right? Because talking about the feminine, the masculine, when the feminine, when you're really like integrated and embodied in our feminine, then she really works with our masculine. Like this isn't about like just sitting around, doing nothing all day long. Like we are natural beings of creators. We are here to create. We create, we create, we create. We're constantly creating our reality. So the difference between performance mindset and pleasure mindset is performance mindset is really like attached to the outcome, and there's this real that the value or worth of somebody is somehow rooted and attached to their success and the external, right? Where pleasure mindset, all of that value, worth is within yourself, and through that understanding you just allow pleasure through you. So think of it this way, it's like performance mindset, you're chasing the carrot that's always in front of you, right? And that's literally the energy that you're creating within, like the chase. And performance mindset, you're creating through the energy of the sheer pleasure of creating, right, rather than chasing. So that's the
Mm.
difference between those two. So absolutely still creating, absolutely still power, I would say even more powerfully creating in the pleasure mindset, because you're vibrationally, you guys, you're a musician, you understand resonance, you understand vibration. When we are in a state of pleasure, and I'm not just talking sexual pleasure, because pleasure can be
Mm.
in every single moment, right? When we're in a state of pleasure, like when you're really in your music and you're really like
Yeah,
high in your creative
yeah.
moment, right? Like you are literally creating with that vibration. So everything that you create with that vibration, it has a potency to it. It's impactful. That's when we create our most impactful, whatever it is, music, art, or projects for people who are much more in business, or anything that we create in that energy has impact because it has a resonance to it.
That's interesting because I'm a synthesis. So what I do compared to some musicians, I actually have like instruments that actually take waveforms, like sine
Mm,
waves, square waves, triangle waves, pulse waves, and I can create tones from the waveforms. And we
mm,
play with filters and resonance and all kinds of envelope
mm,
generators, and we take positive and negative, like electricity, and we
mhm,
move waveforms, we invert them, we fold them, we change them, we morph them into the sounds that we're looking for. And we use these like digital and analog synths that they basically will take these things and can create custom drums. They can create custom sounds and
mm,
sounds that you never heard before. So I can approximate a natural instrument or create an instrument that never existed. And so science fiction, kind of weird atmospheric
mm,
stuff. And it is vibrational because these are sound waves that are going through oscillators. We use what are called oscillators that actually take these waveforms. And when I play these synthesizers, I kind of get in a trance. I kind of get in a zone where
mhm.
they
Yes.
feed to me
Yeah.
as much as I feed to them. I always say to a
Yes.
lot of people, my synthesizers are like members of my band because I use a lot of analog hand built will change based on temperature. They change based on
Mm,
how long you play them. They don't stay in this. They kind of give you nuggets that you didn't even know they were going to give you. So it's like the
mm,
muse giving me something through the universe. And one of the guys who built them, Dr. Robert Moog, said he felt his sense actually had a consciousness. He was
mm,
an inventor, but when he built the Moogs that are famous but used by all these musicians, he felt that he was tapping into something that wasn't just a machine, that it would actually, and I feel when I use them, that's what I feel like. I feel like it's actually, it's like this creativity.
consciousness. Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's like something that,
consciousness. Yeah.
yeah, brings me things, and I listen to it, and I try not to tame it. I try to let it be what it's going to be instead of trying to work it into an idea that I have on the
Mhm,
bars. I let it give to me what it is. And I find
mm.
that when I talk to people who actually kind of let go, and it's kind of orgasmic in a way because you have to let
Yes.
go. You have to kind of let go of your kind of mindset where I'm telling this thing what to do. Where you
Right.
say, well, it's going to talk to me as much as I talk to it, and it's going to control me as much as I control it. It's like back and forth. It's a communication.
I love that. It honestly, when you were speaking, it sounds like you're a magician, you know? And one of the things I teach is sexual magic. And it reminds me of that because to me, sexual magic is really, becoming very much like engulfed by the orgasm, right? Like just really surrendering to ourselves and to the experience. And for women, we have these multifaceted, I mean, like our orgasms are just don't end and you can just get completely submerged within them, and then you just allow that energy through you, and you can just hold a single intention, hold a single image or a single thought, and work that sexual energy simply towards that intention, but really you're just surrendered, and you're really allowing that very creative life force energy, very very magical energy, to really like channel through you. And that sounds very, very similar to what you're speaking of. And absolutely, it's a consciousness. And I love how you work with those energies, because when we, that's the feminine way. The masculine has a little bit more, linear thinking, right? From A to B. I'm going to start here and then I'm going to move along and this is my goal. And the feminine is that more surrendered space, and she's the space of the unknown, and in the unknown, that's where magic happens. In the unknown, that's where miracles happen. But we have to be able and willing to surrender to that, right? Because it's so easy for us to get caught, like you said, to create something specific, or do something from the mind, where it can really take away from the magic and take away from really the availability of the feminine to really pull things that we couldn't even have imagined were possible, or like you were saying, that they shift and they're dynamic, right? And one day you're not getting the same thing that you did the next day, which is so beautiful. And a lot of the work that I do is very similar, because I show up with my clients and we're working with consciousness. Like there's no, I don't have, I mean, I have kind of a kind of a structure, but within that structure, it's totally a surrendered space of like what wants to come through and what really needs to be acknowledged here today in this moment now.
Yeah, what I call the way I record is I found a method where I actually go live from my studio into like a Facebook or YouTube session, and I call it stream of consciousness, like recording. And I basically just put all my multi tracks on record, and I happen to be able to pick up everything on separate tracks, but I can just go and just improvise. And I may have an idea, I might have a poem, I have a one
Mm-hmm.
line like a John
Mm-hmm.
Coltrane, A Love Supreme. I might have a one line idea and then a chant type of thing. Or even I don't mind have any idea and just go into it and I just do it. And what I find is like some of my best work has come from these just jam sessions. And by the time I get to the end, like a song gelled in the last 15 minutes of an hour long session, because I just let it go. And then I start to see the structure and come to
Mm-hmm.
life in front of me. And I go with it. And then, even at the end of it, I finally, I actually been playing for an hour and now we got this thing. And I don't start and stop. I just let it go all the way through. And it's a technique that a lot of musicians in the 60s and 70s used to do. But today, people have gotten into computers and they get on the grid and they get stuck on trying to make something perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always told people the happy accidents are what makes the classic music sound so great, because they would just let it go. You get guys like Neil Young and Crazy Horse and
Mm-hmm.
Allman Brothers, all these bands, they would just go in and just let it track and then say what would
Yeah.
happen. And then later they would refine it, but they would be willing to let it be. Let it be what it give me kind of like the Beatles, like Let It Be. That was like that whole album was basically live jamming. They
Mm.
had been in a structured type of structure and they said, well, let's do something where it's looser. And it came out different. It came out with a different vibe.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the beautiful representation of performance mindset versus pleasure mindset, and it's really interesting how much your work mirrors a lot of what I do. Like, for instance, in a session, again, we'll have like a general intention, but it'll start in one direction and then it'll go off another direction, another direction, another direction. And then by the end of the session, it starts wrapping back around and everything starts clicking. And you can see how it was all like together and connected. And I'm not, I'm just channeling the information and the energy. There's no, process that I'm trying to bring it all around. It just so happens. So
Yeah.
it's really beautiful. That's what I love to work with consciousness, and it's far beyond what our mind could ever come up with, because our minds are limited. They're limited to I always refer to our minds as like a computer, right? It's what we feed
Hmm.
them. It's what we program our minds. But when we tap into consciousness, well, then we're tapping into something that is so far larger and grander than ourselves.
That's why, you have this kind of standing mic and I kind of go into like this idea of being like a beat poet and just let it go. Right. So a lot of my equipment is like, I just have everything so I can just record at my piano, at my keyboards, all my recording equipment is not on my desk on my laptop. It's right next to my synth. And people say,
Mhm.
why you do it like that? I said, because if you do it like that, then anytime you have an idea, you can just go into it. And I don't have to go and try to deconstruct it or be too anal about it. Because people today, they get on these grids, on these computers, and they spend all the time trying to make perfect. And it
Mhm.
sounds phenomenal. But I
Yes.
would argue that if I listen to something like Exile on Main Street or Bitches Brew or like Sun Ra, Spaces to Place or any of the old classic albums, even like the Carpenters, like that stuff was recorded where people actually played instruments and played all the way through and didn't go and chop things up on a grid,
Mhm.
trying to make it exactly perfect and take all the errors
Mhm.
out of it. And
Mhm.
my point in music is like it's not an error, it's a feeling, right?
Yes.
So if you actually make a key change and it wasn't supposed to be there, a lot of times some of the great songs are because somebody made a mistake.
Mhm.
Somebody made a timing error, they did something they didn't think they were going to do, and then if you go back and second guess it, what I've told people is like the third or fourth take of a song is usually the closer to the intention of what you wanted to do.
Mhm.
By the time you get to the 100th take, you've kind of edited all the feeling out of it. And I try to tell people not, even if I had a better mic on the 100th take, I'd rather take the mic that wasn't as good and get the honest performance at the third or fourth take than the one at number 100. This is my perspective as a producer. That's the way I work. Some people are like, "Why do you like it perfect?" So it's a
I
different.
like that. Yeah, because you're almost bringing like another angle as well to the performance versus pleasure that I'm speaking of. Because when you think about it, it's like the performance will, yeah, you'll have this like perfect thing, right? But like you said, it kind of lacks those impactful mistakes that were, as far as consciousness is concerned, were very important, right? And we need mistakes in life, but when we think of it this way, when they're, they are things that we hadn't intended to be in there, or we hadn't intended to experience, and yet they were sometimes the most impactful part of the whole process.
But sometimes people get scared of what they said. I've had artists that's like they were actually being very honest, and then they
Mm,
start second guessing themselves. Well, I don't know if I want people to hear that, and I said as soon as you start thinking that, then they usually said, well, we need to keep that because usually what you want to get rid of, like, and you're scared of it, but that's actually what everybody's going to love, is actually what you're scared of. And it's like the less scared you get about it and the more open you can be, you get closer to getting tapping into what you're talking about, this kind of
mhm,
orgasmic thing that happens
mhm.
with like really great creativity. Like the great moments I've had with other musicians is not even, we're not even telling each other what to do. I've
Yes,
been with bands, it's like
yes,
we just look at each other and we kinda know, and I didn't have to tell you the chord chart, I didn't tell you the key, you just figured it out,
yes,
the drummer just came in, and I don't go and stop and start and say, "Go do this exactly
yes,
like this." That to me usually disrupts the whole thing, if you can
yes.
just don't let it go, and I kind of a lot gotten to the point where I let it go. I mean, I can something if it goes off kilter, but most of the time I let people be who they are. And I find that is a better, at least for me, the way I work, that's how I do it.
I love that so much because, I speak a lot to intimacy. We always think of intimacy as with another person, but intimacy actually first starts with ourselves, right? And the understanding of our bodies and of our energy and all of the different aspects of our being. And then, absolutely, we can become intimate with other people or become intimate with anything, right? Like you can become intimate with your creative process, become intimate with the music, become intimate in the moment. And I loved what you were saying because it reminds me of the process with a lover, like, for instance, my partner and I, when we are sexually engaged, we don't need to say anything to the other. We know exactly how the other person is feeling, what they need. And it's just this beautiful dance, that is, of course, extremely orgasmic, but it's more than that because there's like a communication that's happening, that is nonverbal. And it even, it's a step before the verbal, right? Because before you can even say it, the other person is already there and vice versa. And so there's this beautiful movement that in my opinion really allows, when we're in that space, which is a vulnerable space, and you were speaking to people being authentic, right? Because we feel vulnerable when we're being authentic, but when we really allow that, we allow this deep intimate connection in our physical life, whether that is sexually or whether that is in music or whether that is in our creative process or at work, whatever it is, we can be intimate with everything and everyone. um, then this is where we start to engage in these very subtle energy layers where there doesn't need to be words, and we are ahead of the game and we're speaking through consciousness, right? So this really rids a lot of our process of, like not being able to communicate or not being able, like in a jam session where you're just not seeming to hit it, or like you're having to talk to each other and you're having to tell each other what to do, rather than that flow, that
Yeah.
flow, right? And that's what we experience when we're in this pleasure mindset, is there's this flow to life. Like I don't plan my days, of course I have things that are in my calendar, but for the most part I show up and I really just like, okay, what wants to happen right now? what wants to
Mhm.
happen right now, what wants, and there's always this flow and fluidity. I have, like time is created when time needs to be created. Things fall into place here. Like everything just kind of flows and magically appears per how it's meant to be. I don't have to do anything. So when we're in this rhythm with ourselves, this deep intimacy with ourselves and with others, we really create this flow of life, the
Well,
flow
I
of
think some people
juices.
they stop themselves from being able to do that because, like, if you have somebody that like I've had people in my life where they want to plan like every moment,
Yeah.
and they're not very like they won't get into kind of this off the cuff like let's have a good time, just like let's just go somewhere without it being pre-planned, and to me what happens, like even with a musician, right, if I run to a musician and I gotta give them the chord chart, I gotta tell them the key, but yeah, usually kind of starts to like weaken the connection right from the start. Because most of the time, like when I've been with the guys that end up being in the band, I've been in bands, it's because of that nonverbal communication. They say, hey,
Mhm.
we just click. He
Mhm.
just knows what bass line to play. If I play something on the keys, he knows what bass to do. The other guy knows what drums to do. And if I work with other female musicians, and they just know what to sing or play as well. And when you're vibing with somebody that you actually found somebody like in the same kind of frequency space, that they get it. And if you have to over communicate, then you're like, well, that person's really not in tune with me, because they, even though when I present it, they don't get it. And some
Mhm.
people just don't get it. And then you can kind of wonder, well, if you're running into that disconnect all the time, maybe that's not working.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you were saying about some people need to have, they need to know every moment of the day. Again, that's kind of that is that performance mindset. And it's a very masculine, because the masculine, not men, but masculine that we have in all of us is a very logical, analytical way of working, right? Which we need logic and we need analytical. But when we function from that space, there's this it's very rigid, and there's really like no flow and kind of that malleability that we're speaking of here, right? And again, that's really where that magic occurs and where that orgasm occurs. Like there's not a lot of orgasm in rigidity.
Yeah, it seems awkward. If you're awkward and stiff and you can't
Yeah.
aren't flowing, you're not getting, like a dancer can't be awkward and
Yes.
stiff. They have to be kind of limber and able to, flow. You want to see them like flow across the stage,
Mm.
right? You don't want to see them be so abrupt and like unsure. It's like it's that having to be sure of every little step. Like jazz musicians, what I love about being into fusion and different types of jazz is we can all go into cacophony, and then we come back and we go into it again. We go in and out. You can go in and out of this thing, and it's kind of like, and it can be very beautiful to get into dissonance. Right? We can do dissonance, and we can be on the same
Mhm.
page. So we can
Mhm.
be in totally in tune, and we go out of tune, but it's like actually
Mm.
purposeful, and it's kind of like life. It's not everything is harmonious. So sometimes it will reflect a little chaotic thing will happen, and then we can bring it back, and then we can go into different phases, and it's kind of like life goes through phases, and I love being able to have that kind of phased thing where I can go into distance, I can go into something that's like polyrhythmic or something that's a little off, right?
Mm.
It's not normal melody, it's not something that like is catchy, but I can bring it to something catchy and then go in and out of that. And I always like being able to play with all those types of things.
Well, that's really like the spice of life, isn't it? Because imagine if you ate like the same exact thing every single day for every single meal, right? Like you'd just be bored out of your mind. And so I love that you bring that up, because I think the dissonance is it's creating that polarity of experience, right? So then you get to experience the resonance and the dissonance and like experience both of them. I mean, that's really what life is about, is the entire experience, not just this one way or this very narrow, if we narrow it down to ourselves, we're really like just draining all the pleasure right out of it.
Well, if you try to create that perfect kind of dance beat and then you're stuck on like a 2-minute song, where I might go into something like from yes, like close to the edge, it's like 18 minutes long. It's this big suite, and it goes in and out like a classical piece. goes into different rhythms, it goes into different sections, it has themes, it has things where it goes a little chaotic and it comes back. It's like movements, like Beethoven and Bach, and that type of Chopin. That's progressive rock goes in that way, funk goes that way, jazz, experimental rock music goes that way, and that's what I've always been into. Is maybe something that's a little not the typical top 10 type of thing. It's something that's a little more involved. More like if I'm going to listen to something, I probably listen to "Wish You Were Here" by Pink Floyd or anything they did, even going back to Sid Barrett days. But like, I just like the idea of people being willing to experiment and to have
Mm-hmm.
all these layers, like a sound painting. I've always been into what George Martin and the Beatles talked about when they got into Sgt. Pepper's and Abbey Road, is to use the studio like Monet uses the paint on the canvas. Is that you can do something in the studio that you can't do live. That you
Mm-hmm.
can expand yourself and create these sound paintings that are beyond what you could do as a live band. You
Mm-hmm.
actually start to go beyond what you could do to try to create a vision through sound. And I've always
Mm-hmm.
been into that, a belief that music can do that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you think what it reminds me of while you're speaking is like the universe, right? And all the different facets of, like, if you think about the different cycles of the weather, the different cycles of the tides, the different cycles of our solar system, right? I mean, they all kind of have this rhythm, and then they have the not rhythm, right? Like they go out of their normal rhythm, and there's different things that happen, and like, so, one time it'll be summer and all of a sudden it's not, it's like a really cold and weird summer, or vice versa. The winter is really warm and weird, right? Or like we have eclipses or weird things that happen that come in and kind of disrupt, right?
It's
That
storms. The idea of
normal.
a storm, you have storms you have like storms out in the cosmos. You have all these like
Yes.
type of cosmic storms. You have quasars, you have black holes, you have neutron stars, you got stars that explode,
And the
implode on
sun, the
themselves.
sun does all this stuff too, right? It has all these
Yeah,
solar flares and like,
eruptions. It
yeah.
actually has
Hmm.
eruptions on its surface where it shoots out gamma rays or it shoots out X rays or it has like all these weird behaviors that happen. So it's not just like you look at it and you just think it's this fireball and it's like stable. You actually look under the covers, it's not that stable. It's a lot of things going on. So on the surface, you might appear to be one thing. And then when you go under the surface, you always find out you're something else.
Yes. And I think it's that disruption that really creates expansion, right? Like you were saying, when you're moving out in and out with the jazz of just in and out of resonance, it's, when we move into disruption, it gives us this opportunity of expansion always. And when, like storms are coming in or solar flares are happening, that disruptive energy, there's an energy of friction that it creates, and that friction is like an interaction, right, where we get to interact with consciousness in a different way, right? Because if it's just cruising along in the same manner, there's kind of like this energy of not really numbness but comfortability. That's not even a word.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Being,
if you're
you know
routine, it probably doesn't bring
yes,
orgasm if you're in this numbing routine where you could
exactly.
be psychologically satisfied to a certain extent by your
Yes.
habit, which is basically do the same thing every day. And then you're
Yes.
so scared of the chaos. But the chaos and the friction is what will bring you to the orgasm or bring you to the
Yeah.
expansion. But you're scared of it because you
Yeah.
like the predictability of knowing that every day if I do A, then I'm going to get B. But if I
Yes.
do C, I don't know what I'm going to get. And I'm
What's
scared of that. So I won't do it.
Yes. Yes. And one of the things that the mother, the energy of the ma, she's called the great mother in the spiritual community. One of the things that she told me is for one, she's like, hey, the universe is always having sex with itself, right? Like that's really clear all over the place. It's constantly having sex and creating. And then she is in this constant state of orgasm, and she gave me, like, I mean, a tiny little droplet of her experience, her feminine energy. Like it would be
Mhm.
like a drop of water in comparison to the ocean, and it was so overwhelming for my body, right? Because she's in that much orgasm. But yes, she's always, the whole point of it is like the consuming, the breaking down, the death and the rebirth, right? The constant death and rebirth, constant death and rebirth. There is no just staying in one lane and doing the same thing all the time as far as the planet goes, as far as the universe goes. There's constant shift and change, right? So, we can either connect to that and move with it and it actually flows, and that's where we become orgasmic, or we can fight it and try to stay in this very, comfort space that actually is very challenging to stay there. It creates a lot of struggle. There's no flow.
Yeah, yeah, I found like what I've been kind of disappointed in some of the modern stuff today is that people like to just kind of copy and clone things and then think that's creative.
Mm,
And I'm kind of a person that I like original thought, and I like
yeah,
people like you are. And when you're an artist, you are the sum of all your influences, and there's no original music. The pentatonic scale, people have
absolutely.
done the blues, but
Yep.
I always argue to somebody like, well, the way Stevie Ray Vaughan played Voodoo Child versus the way Hendrix plays Voodoo Child, it's the same song, but it doesn't sound the same
Mhm.
because they both, one of them is a Texas blues guy, the other one's a cosmic like guitar god, and they both come at it. They're worth hearing, but
Mhm.
they're not the same. But if I sampled Hendrix in this, or I sampled Stevie Ray, and I just move it around on a page, that's not the same as being Stevie Ray or Hendrix.
Yeah.
So like to innovate, you have to actually have like a foot in the game and actually do it, and just clone it and copy. And in the future we'll get AI creating music, just taking all these bits and throwing them together. And you can say, well, that's what musicians do. And then that's not exactly what musicians do. They stamp their life experience and their heart and their soul on the song. And if you let AI do that, it's going to be this AI soul doing it, but it's not a human doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, from my perspective, it's, it's the creative energy, the Shakti moving through our unique persona, right? Where, I mean, you are the only you, and I'm the only me. And so, yes, we could take the same song, the same context of information, but when it were to come through each of us, we're going to do it differently because we have a literal different blueprint of
Yes.
creation itself, but it's a different blueprint. It's like our fingerprints. They're unique to us,
Yeah, it's
and
unique.
that's
Yeah,
the
every
beauty of
artist.
creativity.
Yeah, every artist has that fingerprint. And when
Mhm,
people just want to replicate what's been done,
mhm,
then it kind of weakens your own. Like that's why my whole style is to actually take somebody's demo and make them sound like the best version of that demo.
mm,
Why other producers will take that demo and make it sound like them, make it
mm,
sound like something they've already put on the radio, like
mm.
100 times they've already put it, the same
Right.
thing, and they've done the same thing again. It's like, okay, well that worked, but
Mm.
like this person's demo is so uniquely them. We
Yes.
just make the voice sound better and make the kick
Yeah.
drum snappier, or bring out some, double her voice, or do this. It's still her. It just sounds better because we've actually taken the sound and actually treated it with respect, and actually given her voice
Mm.
a bigger platform because we've actually tightened it up. Tightened her,
Mhm,
her genius is there. We just tightened it up,
mhm.
and
Yeah,
we
I mean,
we
when you rever something is what you're speaking of, you have a reverence for the uniqueness, the genius of the person. And when you rever that, that's what you're doing, is you're just like blossoming it, enhancing it, right? Through that reverence, through that honoring of that unique artist. That's really beautiful. That's exactly, again, like what I do with my clients. That's super interesting.
yeah, because there's a different style that gets really kind of like laboratory like, going bar by bar, trying to make it perfect and actually make it sound like somebody else that made $1 million on something. And then it's like, okay, I understand why you want, but that's not actually that person anymore. By the time you take their idea,
Mhm.
you just made a clone of somebody else that, because they hit the top 10. And that person might not be fully, what I've found is most of the time they're not very satisfied. They might be
Yeah.
financially satisfied, but soul
Mhm.
satisfied, they're not, because their original idea was never really presented.
Yes.
right? So nobody
Yes.
really got to see the real version of themselves, and then that causes all kinds of problems because they're basically wearing a mask and they're not able to be who they are.
Yeah.
They're who their A&R person wants them to be, and they're not who they are.
And we all deeply desire to be seen as ourselves. I mean, that is like the innate human desire, is to be seen for who we truly are and not somebody else. And yet, a lot of people are going around doing just what you're doing, what you're saying, because they're so scared. They don't know who they are. They don't truly know who they are. And they're scared to attempt to reveal themselves to themselves and to the world, right? Because they don't. I mean, we're taught, one of the things that happens when I work with women is it usually always go back to the early childhood, right? Because we're taught from very early childhood that pretty much who we are is not really okay for the majority of humanity, right? Like I always
Mhm.
talk about the terrible twos. The fact that we have that terminology for little children who are just in full creative expression, we call them terrible twos, is so self-explanatory of our
Gotta,
society, right? Like,
gotta stop that right there.
stop that. Yeah, whatever that is, all that emotion and that energy and that passion, put a
Gotta
lid
get rid
on
of
it,
it.
right?
Get rid of it.
Yeah, and so like we learn early on that like who we are and our full like unbridled expression is just like not okay. And so we have to
Hmm.
like regain that connection and that real deep trust that yeah, who we are is safe to be, because like you were saying, when somebody takes a piece of work and just copies and pastes it and tries to like create the exact same thing, for one, they're not the person that originally created it. And again, that was created through the resonance of that person, so it worked for that person, it was impactful because it was that person creating that material. Then you try to copy and paste it's not the same, even if it's like word for word the same vibrationally, it's not the same, because again, they're bringing literally that through their vibration, their signature vibration, and it changes the work regardless of whether it seems to be the same. And so it's just not the same. And if they're able to, have the courage, because it takes deep courage, in my opinion, to have the courage to start to honor, like, all right, who am I? And I'm willing to reveal that to myself or go on the journey of that self-realization so that I can connect to my genius and I can allow that to be seen in the world. That's where that fulfillment really comes from. That fulfillment of, at the end of the day, no matter what's happening in your life, you feel fulfilled because you are you.
Yeah, you have to have the courage to actually, um, speak your true self. And I think that is a lot very hard for some people because they really don't want to deal with everything that happens when you do that because it's like a floodgate. And what I found as a musician is like if I don't restrict myself, I just have like so much work I can put out
Mhm.
that I never really run out of ideas. And I've been playing
Mhm.
since I was 17. And
Mhm.
people say, "How could you not run out?" It's really like your mindset. I'm a Buddhist, and I have a mindset that's kind of a universal kind of idea of connecting to the music, connecting outside myself. I'm part Cherokee as well, so I have
Mhm.
some ideas in my head, in my soul, in just in my life force that connect me to the universe maybe easier than somebody that doesn't know how to do that. And I think I try to channel people to get to that place by just being less tight about it. You just got to kind of open yourself up and not overthinking something. Overthinking can really ruin a lot of things.
Overthinking kills creativity. And our pelvis is where, that when I help women and I help people, I help them like deepen into their pelvis and open up their pelvis, and that opens this up right here, opens up this to our authentic self. Not like a person who talks a lot, but a person who can now actually speak to their authentic self. That really starts with our pelvis and really, quite frankly, our sexual power and energy. So yeah, when I work with women, they now all of a sudden, really have that voice that is them, instead of the voice that was their mother or their father or their teacher or whoever it morphs into.
Yeah, a lot of times I was talking to somebody and people confuse their beliefs with values, right?
Mhm.
And you might have like a belief, you like, oh, I believe in respect, but how you execute that right? You think that's a value, right? But respect can be a value, but your belief is how you do it is you're actually, you forced to me to give you respect. Well, that probably is
Mhm.
not a good. That's a belief and that's an action. That's value is respect. To respect
Yes.
people is to not cause violence to people or not push somebody down or subjugate somebody. So if you think that you are forcing respect because somebody should just respect you, and it's all one sided, it's all top down, that's probably not a good place to be. you know,
Yeah, and that's a lot of our society right now about like, politically correctness. Like, what even is that? It's all this made up bullshit that isn't even really coming from here. It's all mental concepts of what we can and can't say, but it's not even taking into account the authenticity of what somebody really means when they say something, because you can be a complete ass
you hate
and
to
be
like take
speaking nicely, or you can be nice and accidentally say something that you're not intending to be a jerk.
Well, I just think like when you have art, like you have like poetry, you have a science fiction book like Fahrenheit 451, or you have, like Odysseus. You read the Iliad, and somebody wants to ban the Iliad because they saw something in it they don't like.
Right.
Like, come on! It was like, yeah, how can you ban art just because like you have a narrow point of view and you're gonna pull it off the shelf and nobody can read,
Mhm.
all these books because you think it's going to pollute somebody's mind is like when actually your idea of like restricting freedom is
Mhm.
actually the pollution.
Absolutely. 100%. Yes.
So
Yes.
being a
Yeah.
creative person, I tend to be more for like why if you don't like it, just don't read it. Don't go and try to be
Absolutely.
like the Beatles. And because John said, "Oh, they were bigger than Jesus," then you got to burn all the Beatle records. Like
Right.
really? That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Because they did.
Yeah.
They actually did that. Yeah, some people did that. He's like, "Oh, because he said that, so I gotta burn all the records." Like, really?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's what when people just start taking things way too personally than just allowing people to be themselves, right?
But he
And that
needs to
comes
get
from
his
their own
British humor.
fear.
He needs
It Yeah, and, it comes from
yeah.
their own fear of them being themselves. So it's like, "Well, you can't be yourself because I don't know how to be myself," you know?
Yeah, it's just they can't that people are not okay with who they
Mhm,
really are, right? Because
mhm,
they have all this baggage. And
mhm.
it came from, like, their belief system, it came from their relatives, it came from their
Yeah,
religion, it came from all these things. And they're stuck
yeah.
in a structure and it's hard to get out. What I found a lot of musicians, they broke out of, like, religious dogma, and then they got free, and then they became very expressive, and, they had to break free of something because they weren't allowed to do what they end up doing in that structure, and then when they finally broke free, they found they had this big volume of material that was inside of them that suddenly starts coming out and they had been restricted and it suddenly becomes open and it's like it's massive amount of capability that happens and then you try to reach those people and get them to channel it in the right ways but because you can go different directions with it and sometimes musicians we've gone into things that are not healthy for ourselves because we explore a lot of things but I think it's just the type of mindset that you don't you can explore things to a certain degree. You got to be mindful of your own body and how far you can push it. But
Yeah, it's definitely about, like, integrity of self, right? And knowing what is loving towards self and what is just abusive or, toxic to yourself, in my opinion.
I think it's awesome to have you on the show. And I was looking at your link, and basically it says self trust series. And that sounds really interesting. Maybe you could talk about what does that involve when people go to your website.
Yeah, well, when we're talking all about this beautiful energy of this creative flow, and we're both talking about how we can connect into these streams of consciousness, this that really takes a level of trust, right? You have to be willing to surrender. You have to be willing to trust that that flow can come through you. And so what I'm offering here, the self-trust series, it really helps people just start to engage in that conversation of trust with themselves so that they can open up to their intuition, so that they can open up to that creative flow of consciousness through them. And then it's three different videos that really set people up to learn how to trust their own intuition and trust their own stream of creative flow.
Okay, for our audio listeners, I actually talk it out. Is HTTPS / www.alarasage.com / self trust series. So you can go to that. It will be clickable on the video version of the podcast, but we have audio listeners, so we'll give you that. So you can type that in later. But yeah, thank you for being on the show. We're at the closing time for it, but time always goes by really quickly when we're having great conversations. And we love to be able to talk to different people all the time. And this has been a great conversation. It's opened up my mind to something I think I was already kind of in your mind, what you're talking about. We've kind of parallel run into the same feelings just doing what we do, but it's cool to actually talk with somebody who's on the same, in that kind of mindset. So I think it's been a really, really awesome conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no idea that we were going to have so many parallels between what we do. And it was just really delightful to learn and hear about your process and how it parallels mine and just learn more about you. That's extraordinary. I really enjoy listening to you.
Thank you very, very much. We're going to be on a lot of platforms later tomorrow, including Apple Podcast, Google Play, Spotify Video Podcast. And then we'll have a blogger page, a landing page where everybody can get to their favorite platform to listen. We'll send that to you, so then you can use that however you want. And we'd love to have people come back on the show. We had repeat people come on the show at different points in time. We encourage you to, if you ever want to come back on the Phantom Electrico show, that'd be cool. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.